Last year in 2025, Lando Norris won the World Driver Championship in F1, and McLaren completed a double of manufacturer championship wins 2 years in a row. And get this, they did it with a Mercedes engine. Not only did they beat their rival using their rival's engine, but Red Bull did the same thing with the Renault engine back in 2010 to 2013, winning 4 in a row. So clearly being an engine customer doesn't stop you from winning races and championships. But if we look at MotoGP, there's a really clear difference. You can be a customer in MotoGP and get the exact same equipment as the manufacturer. And that's the key word here, manufacturer. I'm Tim from Ride Along Trackside. We're going to look at 3 things today. Firstly, we're going to look at what the MotoGP model is, where a customer can purchase a complete package. Secondly, we're going to look at the proof in the pudding of why a customer can win a championship in MotoGP. And then thirdly, we're going to compare to F1 and why it's so different. What is a customer? What is a manufacturer? And we can use the examples of McLaren and Red Bull. So firstly, diving into MotoGP, we need to first look at what a factory team is. If you think about Ducati, Lenovo, or Monster Yamaha, they are the manufacturers of their bike, and they can then lease that to a customer. And we call customer teams satellite teams in MotoGP. What that actually looks like is that a team like Pramac, they will lease the Yamaha from the manufacturer and race that same spec bike. The only difference for Pramac would be if there's an issue with ride height overall with riders. For example, Top Rack is quite tall, so they had to make changes to the rear aero in order to meet height restrictions for the bike. But otherwise, they're starting with the same equipment. The manufacturer can choose to give either the existing bike, so the same one that their factory team riders are using, or they might give last year's race bike to the satellite team. As a customer team in MotoGP, you don't actually mechanically change anything in the bike to make it different from the manufacturer when you receive it. And it's also the same aero. You're not building any of that yourself, but you don't have the same support as a satellite team because you're not the actual manufacturer. And then you're also competing against a manufacturer who has more data than you do. As a customer, you will get some version of support because you're obviously leasing equipment from Ducati or from Yamaha or from KTM or from Honda, but it's going to be very different for you because like Trackhouse, you're competing at the very top level against Aprilia. And we can all safely assume that the manufacturer wants to win on their marquee bike. They don't want their customer to beat them. Another great example this year is that Gresini is running the same bikes as the factory Ducati team. So how far can you go as the satellite team? Well, in 2024, Jorge Martin, or the Martinator, he won on a Pramac Ducati bike. He was the first satellite team rider in the modern era to win a world championship, but it shows that it can be done if you are the customer in MotoGP. He even won by getting the most world championship points of any season ever, on 508. In order to win in 2024, he needed to beat the Ducati rider Francisco Bagnaia, or Pecco. And Martin has even said publicly that he was disadvantaged as the customer versus the actual manufacturer Ducati. And the examples that he gave was that Ducati would get all the information across all of their bikes. So as the customer, they would get information about you as the rider on their bike because you're leasing it, which does give the manufacturer an advantage on how to use that information to help their factory riders do better. But even with a disadvantage versus the factory, he could still win many races, including sprints, and then take the championship. If we look this year, Aprilia, for example, Ogura won in Assen. It was his first MotoGP win, and it was actually a Trackhouse 1-2 in that race. They're customers of Aprilia, and then third place was at Aprilia. And what this really does for MotoGP is it opens up the entire field. So one manufacturer may be more dominant, say Ducati or Aprilia. We don't necessarily know which team or which rider is going to be the most dominant in that race or in that year. It's much more competitive across the field. But given that F1 has customer teams too, why is it not the same case? If you think about McLaren and Red Bull, it seems like customers are winning all the time, but it's not the same. While they can buy the engine and gearbox from Mercedes or Ferrari or Renault or Ford or Honda. Each team in F1 also needs to be a manufacturer. So they need to build their own chassis. They need to build their own aero. And that's what really makes the difference in F1. It is possible that you have a great engine that your manufacturer also has at Mercedes, but the manufacturer part is where points are won and lost, where races are won and lost. Because if you can't do that, then you're nowhere. And a great example of that is Haas. They're a team that actively try and buy as many parts as legally possible from Ferrari. And they've never won a race in a whole decade of racing in F1, which means that in F1, you can't be a pure customer and win. And there's a lot of expense that comes along with that, which is why they needed to institute a cost cap in F1, because the price of manufacturing all of the car bits and aero is incredibly high. Whereas in MotoGP, it's possible to build a team around you, lease a bike from a manufacturer, and even if you don't have all of the same data and information as the manufacturer, you have the ability to build a winning team. So we might see this year Trackhouse Aprilia team winning lots of races, and maybe they're in the hunt for a world championship this year. In F1, we're going to see Haas nowhere, but any customers that win in F1 are going to become the best manufacturers of chassis and aero. And this is what makes MotoGP so exciting. I'd love to hear from you, especially if you're an F1 fan. Would you like to see F1 car teams that are run the same way as MotoGP, or maybe vice versa? And as always, we appreciate a like and a subscribe. We'll see you in the next one.